On some occasions, Jesus directly opposes those who stand against him. In other cases, he walks alongside them to guide them to a new realization. Can David Kantor's 4-player model help us be more perceptive to which tool is right for the job? Hello and welcome to this video on dealing with complexity at church. We're exploring frameworks and models and how they apply to the conversations we might have. This video looks at David Kantor's 4-player model, which is part of his wider framework known as structural dynamics. David Kantor suggests that all conversations follow patterns. Patterns made up from 4 distinct voices: move, oppose, follow, and bystand. The move is made by somebody proposing a particular direction, a new idea or concept they wish to advocate. They initiate in this an action. To oppose is to challenge the move, propose an alternative, or play devil's advocate in the conversation. A follow appreciates the move, adds to it, and expands on it. For example, the move might start an idea, and they can follow through to a way that actually actions it fully. And finally, to bystand is to observe and take a neutral perspective. They reflect on the conversation and notice or name what's going on and bridge the gaps. When observing conversations, we can see patterns, and there are common places where we often get stuck. For example, if everyone makes a move and no one follows, opposes, or bystands, we end up with several open ideas that no one seems willing to take to completion. No one voices approval or disapproval of the ideas. There's 3 perfectly valid moves, for example, but no consensus. No one follows, no one opposes. You can imagine a similar way of getting stuck between move and oppose, with no one following and no one bystanding, which just gets into a back and forth between people advocating one way or the other. And this would look a lot like a pair of level 2 listeners having a debate from our second video. You can also get stuck when someone moves and everyone else bystands. For example, someone might say, "Hey, let's have pizza tonight," and others might say, "Well, pizza is one of the UK's favourite takeaways," or "Pizza comes from Italy's Campania region." All very interesting information, but none of this resolves the situation. Finally, if a move is only met by follows, it's either a really good common sense idea, or you've managed a false consensus, in which people are scared to oppose. Now, possibly the most important takeaway from David Kantor is the importance of the bystander. The bystander doesn't advocate for or against any action, but invites more information to be shared, enabling the suspension of a continual advocating back and forth, which we can get stuck in, or by allowing people to speak when a false consensus arises and no one dares oppose. The bystander seems in line with theory used level 3 or even maybe level 4 listening, and is also taking a broad, right hemisphere, big picture view of the world. In his book Dialogue, William Isaacs has some great bystander phrases to be utilised. One is just to name what's going on. For example, the way we're talking right now, each one of us advocating, no one inquiring, everyone defending a position, won't move this conversation forwards. Or, advocating this way is unlikely to move us to the point of reflecting on why we have these views. So let me ask, why do each of us feel pressured to defend ourselves? And could we ask, what are we missing that we don't want to hear? And finally, let me invite you to tell us not your positions, but your first-person experience right now as you have this conversation. The bystander suspends the back and forth, invites new perspectives, and can raise the consciousness of the group to see a bigger picture. Now, when we make a move in a group and advocate an action, it is usually a move that steers the group towards one of 4 systems. David Kantor suggests there are 3 systems, and later Larry Constantine adds a 4th. These are the random system, the closed system, the synchronous system, and the open system. And we're going to look at how these might overlap with Jonathan Haidt's moral matrices that we have already looked at. We may move to open up and explore a topic, or we may move to close down to an answer. For example, if I make moves to advocate inclusivity and celebrate diversity, I want to make sure every voice is heard before making a decision, and I'd be comfortable in the open system. Now, this sounds to me like a need for care, fairness and liberty, and possibly mapping onto Jonathan Haidt's liberal matrix. Perhaps I make a move that advocates a clear chain of command in the group. I want better leadership and authority to be given to leaders, more attention to accountability in subcommittees and punctual start times. This indicates that I would feel more comfortable in the closed system. And again, to me, this sounds like a need for loyalty and authority to tradition, as well as fairness, and so possibly mapping onto Jonathan Haidt's socially conservative matrix. Now, if I make moves towards advocating more individuality and expression, and I advocate moving quickly to solve a problem with new approaches, then I'm more comfortable in the random system. And this sounds like a need for liberty and fairness, and could possibly map onto Jonathan Haidt's libertarian matrix. Finally, if I make moves advocating a clear vision and efficacy, I want to make sure things can be measured and plotted so everyone knows what to do next. I'm more comfortable in a synchronous system. To me, this too sounds like a need for authority and loyalty, but to a more efficient and, you might say, modernist economic system. Think Margaret Thatcher's and Ronald Reagan's Conservative and Republican parties in the 80s. We'll look more into cultures like modernism and postmodernism in a future video. Now, synchronous and closed systems seem to me to be more focused on preserving institutions that sustain the group. This is what Jonathan Haidt calls the most sacred value for conservatives. And it's interesting to note that since social conservatives touch on more of the moral foundations, they often get a bigger share of the vote and a greater share in the discussion. And that is reflected here too, in that they overlap with two of our four systems from structural dynamics that people will want to move towards. So the take home here again is self-awareness. What do we find ourselves moving towards most often? Where do we get stuck back and forth in a debate? Where might there be false consensus? Can we suspend our position and bring in some form of inquiry voiced by the bystander? Now, if we're thinking biblically about this, perhaps we can think of Elisha's servant, whose eyes were opened to realize that he wasn't stuck in a dead end. There was more information if only he was open to a broader perspective to be aware of. And it seems that Jesus knew to be a bystander rather than an opponent on the road to Emmaus. He brings in more information from the scriptures and then leaves the two disciples with a desire to return back to Jerusalem through having seen something greater over having been argued with and proved wrong. Yet on other occasions, Jesus moves to oppose the religious leaders by turning the tables in the temple and condemning them strongly. It seems that Jesus has a perspectival knowledge that helps him know when to use which of these voices. In the next video, we will look at transactional analysis. This looks in more detail at what happens when we do get stuck between move and oppose, and how to break out of it.